Hey everyone, Anthony Franzese here. Today we have a really fun conversation with Kaleana Quibell. She's the VP of Wellbeing at Sequoia Consulting Group and a mother of two. Kaleana has had a really successful career, so it's great to hear how she's juggled some of that ambition and success with becoming a mom. We also talk about mental health and anxiety in kids today. Also, is LinkedIn giving adults anxiety? Kind of ironic because I do share this podcast on LinkedIn, but I'll have to think about that. Anyway, I appreciate you listening. If you would click the follow button and leave me a rating, that'd mean the world to me. It's the best way to help grow the podcast. Now, on to the show. Welcome back to the Successful Working Parents Podcast, the podcast where we talk to successful working parents. The title is still pending, but my guest is officially here. She is the VP of Wellbeing and Platform Partners at Sequoia Consulting Group. She's the founder of Trust Me, It's Relevant, contributing writer at Thrive Global, and advisor to Bring Change to Mind. Ladies and gentlemen, Kaleana Quibell. Kaleana, how's it going?
Hi, great. How are you doing?
I am doing well, thanks. Thank you for joining us today. So usually we just start off with a quick background on your career.
hmm Yeah, so as mentioned, I juggle a few different roles in a few different places, but I've been the VP of Wellbeing and Platform Partners at Sequoia for a while now. I've been at Sequoia itself for almost 9 years. And so my primary role in that space is that I help all of our clients who are primarily VC-backed tech companies spread throughout the United States. I help them really try to understand what are these cutting edge programs that they can use to support their people. And what that means is truly anything that as an employee you may need to feel supported in your professional and personal journey. So physical health, emotional health, financial health, parenting programs, learning and development, whatever it might be. And then, yeah, on the outside of it, I love, just supporting random causes around what people need to thrive in the workplace. So, Trust Me, It's Relevant was sort of a passion project started to bring more awareness around topics that are relevant to the workplace. And then I advise on some different startups and companies like Bring Change to Mind in the mental health space and do some writing. So, pretty much everything just revolving around my passion for employee well-being is the sum of it. Just really
Yeah,
like help support and bring awareness where I can.
yeah. And you are a mother of one with one on the way, right?
Yes, so I have a 2.5-year old. He just turned 2.5 at home, Caden, and then we are due with our second boy in any day in the next few weeks. So, going to be expanding quickly.
Very exciting. So I have had a few parents on here, and it's always interesting to hear about those that have multiple kids, and how that shift was. You're like
Yeah.
right before it. So do you like? How are you feeling about going from one to two? I hear that's the biggest jump to make.
Yeah, I would put it to your listeners to give me the advice on that one. But I mean, the biggest thing for me is I have noticed that my first maternity leave, I was really concerned about, myself, I guess, like was my primary concern because I was worried, am I going to be a good mom? Am I cut out for this? What does it mean for my career? And the second go around, you kind of divide your fears a little bit with, how is my son going to adapt to this, and is he going to be okay, and is his sleep going to change, and how are my husband and I going to do this? So it does feel really different, and I think the biggest thing to work through for us is just going to be that adjustment, right? Like, how do we, go from both our attention being on this one little human to dividing and conquering, and making sure we're supporting our son who is, two and talkative and adventurous and wants attention, with, the baby itself. So yeah,
Yeah.
lots to come.
Yeah, well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
You are a well-being advocate. You've been in the space for a long time, as have I. And so this is something I've been thinking about as well. How much do you bring your passion for health and well-being into your parenting, especially in the first few years? Is it already something that you're trying to instill in your son? Is it something that isn't on your radar yet? Or how do you approach that?
Oh, definitely. So, I mean, my background has always been in actually psychology at its core. So, I was really interested in mental health even at a young age, like junior high and high school, as part of a lot of groups that helped support that in our schools. And then when I went to college, I majored in psychology and actually went on to get my graduate degree in psychology as well, kind of focused on emotional workplace applications and kind of what they call organizational psychology. So raising my child has been really rooted in that sort of like what's a child's mindset and what sort of psychological things is he going through at different developmental stages, and a lot of that ties back into their well-being, right? So how is he sleeping, what's stressing him out, is he getting enough activity, what's he eating. And so while I'm not too strict on it, I think you can drive yourself a little mad if you try to be the perfect parent. I definitely look at the similar areas that we look at even as adults with that well-rounded, holistic look to raise him in a holistic sense to make sure I'm focusing on each area of his own well-being too.
Yeah. Mental health advocacy back when we were in high school, I feel like that was a little bit ahead of its time. You must have been a little cutting edge there, right? The last, 5, 6 years, and certainly since COVID, it's been a huge topic. But I feel like, was that
Yeah,
kind of a more of a fringe? Like, who was in that group with you?
yeah. I mean, it's funny. Like we definitely, I can't take all the credit. Like I think we had some teachers and counselors that were ahead of their time, but we had these sort of peer mentorship groups at our high school that were really focused on just looking out for students and kind of raising awareness of the stressors of applying for college and some of those things that were starting to come about. And so the idea was really sort of this like no kid sits alone sort of mentality, right? Like just making sure that if there were kids that seemed to be a little bit more isolated or were acting out or things, that they were working on a support system for them. And then I think just in general, bringing awareness to how kids cope with the stressors that seemed so normal. But by the time even I was in high school, and I'm sure it's way worse now, you were having to take multiple AP classes and be in sports and be on honor society and do all these things to even get into college. And it was a lot of pressure. And so we talked a lot about just like ways to help mitigate that. So yeah, and I'm glad to
Yeah.
see it's grown even more with kids today. They're very in tune with their mental health.
Yeah, I could have used you guys when I was in high school for sure.
Yeah.
I don't think that class made it made it to my neck of the woods.
Yeah.
And I know that, when I was a kid, anxiety, I feel like wasn't a word. I feel like I didn't really learn. I mean, it existed as a word, I suppose, but it wasn't really something that people talked about having. And not until, I guess, maybe I was in college, I feel like it started to become a thing. And now it's really common to describe what you have as anxiety, and for even, little kids to have anxiety and things like that. Do you see that as, well, I mean, I think overall it's a positive, right? Because it's
Yeah.
spreading awareness of it. But do you think there's more prevalence of it today, or you think it's just more identified today, or maybe a little both?
It's a little bit of both. I think for sure it's more talked about and identified as it. I think a lot of times you just talk about, I was part of the generation of kids that was like the first ADHD, I feel like, diagnosis. There's a lot of kids that were put on Adderall and things. And
Yeah.
so you kind of look back at that and you're like, probably not all of those were ADD. They were probably cases of anxiety or frustration or just, different sort of activities, but they were all kind of bucketed.
Drinking too much
Um,
juice and soda in the morning.
Exactly, exactly. Like pretty
Sometimes
much
that's all it
every
takes.
boy, yeah,
Yeah.
every boy I knew had ADD. And you look back and a lot of those parents are like, no, I think they were just being boys and
Yeah.
hyper and, things like that. But yeah, so I think nowadays, like a lot of it is more uh, labeled correctly as anxiety and just, it's thought of not so much as a mental disorder, but just as a general thing that we all go through and that we need the tools to cope with. Um, and I do think it's interesting because it's not necessarily that it's way more prevalent today, but I do just think social media, the internet, everything has made us more aware of who all has it. We talk a lot about how, when I was growing up, you only really knew the kids that existed in your high school. And now you think of high schoolers today, they could talk to anyone on the internet from the entire world. And so the people they interact with are judged by, comment on, is a lot bigger pool. So I think there's just more like visibility to that. And that goes into the workplace too. We see more people on LinkedIn, we're connected with more people outside of our company. And so you just have a bigger audience that you're seeing, and then likewise that you're talking to and connected with. Like the fact that I'm connected with, tens of thousands of people on LinkedIn that I don't know wouldn't exist if LinkedIn wasn't a thing. I would just know the people at my own company or past companies. So you see it a lot more.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know that they always say social media has given kids anxiety because it gives them a lot more to compare to, right? And they can see so many other people, and just if they're living up to that standard or not. But in reality, I suppose LinkedIn is doing something similar to us, right? Because it's like you see so many people talking on LinkedIn about the success they're having in their jobs and what they've done and the money that they're making and things like that.
Yeah.
I never thought about it before, but I guess it's probably doing something similar to us.
Totally, totally. I mean, I think about this a lot because you're seeing people, both to your point, post the positive, like they're boasting about career moves that they're making, and like some people even post how much money they're making or career change, all of that. But then you also get down the doom scroll of people who are getting laid off, and that causes a lot of anxiety because people think, could I be next? So yeah, it definitely has its pros and cons, but you're exposed to way more of that, especially now that you can see second degree and third degree connections post onto your feed. It's kind of an endless, an endless scroll of content.
Yeah, shame on you, LinkedIn.
I
Never realized what
know.
they were doing to us before. So, okay, so you have a 2.5-year-old son, you have a full time career, you have another kid in the way. So, how has that juggling act been since you made the transition into motherhood, and how have you found it to go back to work and manage being a mom and being a worker?
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, I vividly remember my first few. So it's kind of funny to go back to the time I had my son. I have to acknowledge that it was during some of the peaks of COVID. It was March 2021, and so when I was going back to work, it was a very weird time. You hear lots of women talk about their maternity leaves, and while there's so much that you have to do at home, you are still able to get out of the house or go to a park or meet a friend for a play date. And for a lot of women like myself who had babies during the COVID time, there was a higher amount of isolation. Like we were stuck at home, we were scared of getting the babies sick. So by the time I hit about 4 months of maternity leave, I was actually kind of ready to go back because I craved social interaction with anyone.
Yeah.
But it's a hard time. My brain didn't work the same way. I found myself stumbling over words. It was just an interesting experience. I didn't feel like I had the touch, that I had before. So I really had to, remind myself and humble myself a little bit and say, hey, you're not the same person you were before you went on maternity leave. You're better in a lot of aspects and you're going to be a little slower in other ones. And so just give yourself a little grace. And so I think the main thing that I really looked at is I truly had to write down a list of what are the things that I'm still really good at, I still feel sharp on, I still am knowledgeable about, and then what are things that are going to take a little bit more time. And that was things like maybe giving a presentation because I felt like my brain was foggy. It was going to be harder than someone asking me my opinion about the mental health space and writing out a response or things like that. So I just kind of had to learn a little bit about my reentry and remind myself of where my strengths and weaknesses lied and sort of continue to reevaluate that. And then I think the biggest thing that came out of it, though, that I've come to really embrace and appreciate, especially as an advocate, was I just started being way more vocal about what was going on in my personal life and explaining that in the context of the work I had that day. So before it was a huge struggle because I would get 2 hours of sleep that night and then I'd come into work and try to, pretend everything was fine, but I'd be like missing the mark on things or forgetting to do something because I didn't write it down. And once I started voicing to my team, like, hey guys, last night was a rough night. Like, I'm actually going to take this meeting off to work on this deck. I think you guys can run with it, and sort of explain the context of my day and revolved things around how my mindset and my energy level was that day. It helped a ton. And people came out of the woodworks to also vocalize their support, to be like, oh, I remember the days of rough sleep. Like, here's what I did. So I think just becoming more personable with that and letting my team and the broader team into, like I said, my state of mind and energy level that day was probably the thing that helped me the most. So it wasn't that I was trying to be who I was before. I was being a little bit more honest to, today's going to be a slow day for me. I'll catch up on that tomorrow. Or can we move this meeting? And that really, really helped.
Have you made peace with that, or is that something that you still struggle with? I mean, I've known of you for a long time.
Yeah.
You're well respected in the space. You're pretty senior at Sequoia. So, is it something that you still kind of grapple with, or is it something that you've figured out how to balance?
I think sometimes the biggest thing when I was, even thinking of talking with you, I was like, what is the biggest thing I had to change that I get sad about sometimes? And for me, I think it's the way that I network both internally at the company and externally. So I work primarily remote and I do a lot less than I did before. So, happy hours, conferences, like pre-baby, I was sign me up for anything. I'll always be there. I'll be
Yeah.
social. I'll be connecting with you. If there's an after work curricular, sign me up. And once, you have a child, I had to sort of wind that down a little bit and pick and choose. And so sometimes I'd say that's the one part that I struggle with because I still question, did I miss out on an opportunity or a project or something because I wasn't visible enough? But I think I've remind myself and do, come to peace, like you said, with the fact that I'm like, it's not that I am not doing great things. I'm just doing more specific things that I really want to focus my energy on, as opposed to just spreading it across to be as visible as I can in every area.
Yeah, I mean, I can really relate to that. Being in the sales world, I was doing a lot of networking, and even at this current company, up until my daughter was born, I was like, "Hey, wherever you need me to go, I'll be
Yeah.
there." And I went around the country doing conferences, and now there's conferences coming up, and I'm like, I don't think I can make it right now. I don't think,
Mhm.
if it's in New York, that's one thing, but it's tough to be away for 2 or 3 nights for a
Yeah.
conference in California right now. So that's kind of something
Yeah.
I'm still kind of grappling
Yeah,
with.
and it's tough. And I think that's where I've, like, it sounds silly that I've become more of like a commenter, like, I'm more active on like LinkedIn and things like that than I was before, because I do recognize that, let's say I was invited to a women's executive dinner of sorts this upcoming Friday, and just knowing I'm, a few weeks away from giving birth, probably thought it wasn't wise to, hit the town and go out.
Yeah.
So I missed it. But like what I ended up doing was, I looked at the attendee list. I wrote down the names of a few women that like I would have wanted to meet had I gone in person. And I ended up sending them a note just saying, "Hey, I saw you're going to this event. Like, unfortunately, I can't make it. I'm, about to go on maternity leave. I'd love to catch up." I connected with them on LinkedIn, and many of them like responded to me, and we did sort of small chit chat or found a time to talk. So I think it's just pivoting, right? Like you start to recognize you don't have to miss out on the entire event just because you're not physically there. You just have to adjust the way that you network, so that you can still get things out of it, but sort of around the clock or in your own hours. Because those were women I was messaging at 8 at night, and it was fine. I'm missing the dinner, but I'm still going to get some value out of that invitation. Um, so things like that I think are important to remember too.
Have you made any sacrifices in the other direction? Like, are there times where you do have to do something for your career that you and maybe means less family time?
Yeah. I mean, when I first came back, I do still go to some conferences. I do team offsites where we'll be, we'll all stay near the office at a hotel or something for a few nights. And so there definitely are times that I am away from home. And especially as, I don't know if you felt this way with your daughter, or how old she is, but my son started to talk like very vocal recently. And it makes a huge difference when you leave a baby at home and they cry a little bit. And then when, you leave a baby and they're like, "Mommy, don't leave
Oh my
me."
god, I can't imagine.
It stabs the heart a little bit. And so that has been tough. It's been hard to know that he comes home from his nanny share and asks where I am now. And, he notices more in my absence. So that's been a little bit of a struggle. But I think that's where, again, like the commitments that I do choose to pursue, I'm very thoughtful of, what's the goal of this? What am I getting out of it? Is this an opportunity worth skipping family time for? Or is it something like the dinner where I can find a way to network elsewhere outside of it? So I'm just very strategic about those bigger commitments I do make, but it's hard. I mean, it's always hard to leave your loved ones for a little bit, especially as they become more aware of your absence.
Yeah.
So
Well, my daughter's only 2 months old, so now I have something
I
to dread in the future. So
was
thank you.
gonna say, I thought she was younger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once she starts talking, though,
Something to
watch
regret
out.
later. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
I'll take
Once she
advantage
says
now
"Missy
before
Daddy,"
she can
that's
complain. I guess I'll start traveling now.
exactly, now's the time.
Yeah. What about tips for self-care? Do you still find time to make time for yourself, or what does that look like in light of becoming a mom? You're obviously
Yeah.
a well-being enthusiast, so I imagine it's important to you.
Totally, it definitely is. I think the biggest things for me are calendar management, and I know, like, trust me, I am someone who, if I didn't step into action with my calendar, I would have meetings from 7:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. So I think the main things that I've done is allocate time each day where I physically create a meeting invite for the thing that I need to do for myself during those working hours. And that's not to say I'm taking 3 hours in the middle of the day to run off and do things, but I have these little bite-sized pieces for myself that I do. So for example, I have a 30-minute walk that I do with my dog every day when I start the day. I get the kid off to school and I come back to my computer. I check one thing that I can do really quickly. And then 8 a.m. is walk the dog time. And everyone on my team knows that's on my calendar. They know that I have my cell on me. So if you have a quick question, you can ask me, but it's my time to get a walk in. And then throughout the week, I do a couple just, quick stretches or classes in the afternoon where I also block that time. And I think that to me is like what is really, really important, because a lot of people create those meetings or project blocks for themselves, but they create it as optional. They allow people to book over it, or they, offer it up as a time. So if you had asked me, about this podcast and said, Kaleana, can you do 8 a.m. tomorrow morning? I'd say, sorry, that's my walk the dog time. And I just like hold strict to it, because the way I think about it is I'd never cancel on a client meeting if I had it in my calendar. And so I treat meetings with myself just like client meetings. I don't cancel on myself. And I think that's really, really important. And then, a lot of this just goes into partnership with my spouse. I have an amazing husband who is very helpful with this. And we try to allocate, a few nights a week where we're able to do something that's important to us, or we get a sitter so we can do a date night. And all those things are just really important to, I think, investing both in ourselves and our relationship, and, being able to show up for our kid and work by being able to do that.
One thing that's been on my mind lately is the impact that we have on our kids, like on their
Uh-huh.
psyche, and we were talking about mental health before, and your background in psychology. Like, to me, it's very daunting,
Yeah.
just like how impressionable and influential we are on kids in those first, 0 to 5 years, right? Like, how do you really, how do you not mess it up? I think is really the issue, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's crazy. And I mean, I've read a lot of psychology books, and everything goes back to, they usually relate to childhood trauma, right? Like, but it's all just like about your upbringing, like the type of person you are, where you went to school, how your parents parented you, discipline, everything really does have a longer term impact. So I think that about that a lot as well. But I think the main thing is again, that goes kind of into the partnership side. So I think my husband and I just talk a lot about like what our values are and the way that we want to, approach things. We also look out a lot for, we kind of call our kids triggers, So I think one thing that, whether you're a kid or an adult, right, like there's things that set you off. And the more you start to know someone and get to know their personality, you can look out for those things. So I think like, at least for me as a parent, that's like the main thing I just try to focus on, is really being cognizant of what triggers my son has. And we try to either like avoid those situations or talk through those situations, or, just create like healthy boundaries and reactions to them. Because I figure if we can find a way to help set him up with the tools to get through the things that really stress him out, then he'll hopefully be better coping, better able to cope with them as he moves forward in his adolescence and adult life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about Trust Me, It's Relevant.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So pretty much after I had the birth of my son, there was so much about what I was going through as a new parent that I would have never, 10 years ago thought that anyone would be allowed to bring up in the workplace, right? Like it just didn't feel like something you would tell your boss. It felt too personal, like something not relevant. And more I started to see on LinkedIn, social media, my own team, that whatever was going on in their personal life was having a very direct impact on their work. I've said this multiple times, but I truly believe that work performance is usually always a personal rooted issue, right? Like something's going on outside the workplace, or they don't understand the role at hand, or, it's something like that, usually, as opposed to just being a bad performer. And so I think once you start looking at what is going on in a person's life, what are they dealing with, it does become directly relevant to the workplace. So I have a cousin who is an illustrator of sorts. She writes books and she's amazing. And so we kind of came up with this idea of how do we put into illustration some of these things that people are going through that they probably don't think are relevant to work, but as the tagline suggests, trust me, it actually is relevant. So whether that's caregiving, mental health, finances, even just like climate disasters or things like all of that stuff is very relevant to the workplace. And so we're just kind of trying to bring some awareness to it. So we started making some posts about it and just started talking to people. And the idea is that as it continues to develop, we just want to find ways for people to share their stories so that other people can know they're not the only ones going through that scenario and that it is very relevant to the work at hand.
So are you trying to like make a connection between if this is going on in your personal life, this is how it might be manifesting in your work life?
Yeah, exactly. So, we did a recent post on, maternity leave, for example, and how a lot of people just think maternity leave starts when you go out to have your baby and it ends when you come back. And really, this idea that supporting a maternal person is that it's a long road and they are going to be a mom for the rest of their life.
Hmm.
And so there's different touch points you should do. And so, kind of suggesting resources and ways for people to, one, know it's okay to talk about that, but also things that companies can be doing to help support those people.
Is there something that comes to mind as like a way that things manifest in your work life from your personal life that most people don't really make the connection to, but it is relevant, more relevant than people realize?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of like the need for flexibility is what comes to mind the most. I think a lot of people just, this has been talked about so much, right? Is this concept of the 8 to 5 is long gone, right? Like school schedules don't align with that. People's appointments for doctors and things that they need to do don't align with that. And so there's a big need to adjust that. And so I would say, if anything, it's that trying to think of like all the things that you have to do during the day. If you, let's say you didn't have a set work schedule, like how would you align your life? I think if you're able to, I don't know if manifest, like you said, is the right word in that context, but if you were to think about like how would I be my most productive self by looking at all the things I need to do around that, and you were able to build that use case for it to be relevant in the workplace, you would be your most productive self. Like you would be able to, juggle the things that come up or meet the needy needs and resolve a lot of your stressors that just have to do with the whole battle of balancing things with two conflicting schedules and lives.
Yeah. What happened to 9 to 5? That was supposed to be 9 to 5, right? I feel like it quickly became like 9 to 6. I guess you're on the West Coast, right? I feel like West Coast is really more 8 to 5, and then the East Coast is really more like 9 to 6. I think.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I always say 8 to 5. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I think it is just so funny because like those
Like
are
it's
kind of
not
the
cool to stop working at 5 o'clock. I feel like.
yeah, yeah. And, even myself, like I'll leave my computer, but now I have my phone, right? So Microsoft Teams or email, like I kind of just try to stay on things for a few hours after work ends. Um, and that's not great, right? So I think there's some days where I'm trying to be better about that too, where I say, hey guys, I'm going to be signing off at 3:30 p.m. PT because that's when my son needs to be picked up, and then make clear that I have an open window from like 7 to 8 where I check emails. Which again, that might sound crazy because people argue, maybe this is controversial opinion, but they argue once you shut it down, you should shut it down. But I have a team of all moms, and a lot of us prefer that, right? Like we would rather shut it down at 3:30 and get back online for an hour after the kids go to bed to have that really quality time. So I think a lot of that's important too.
Yeah, I'm not a big advocate of like fully unplugging. I mean, sometimes of course, but I would also rather be like kind of on, not on call, but like kind of available when needed, as opposed to
Yes.
like, okay, I work from this time to this time and I cannot be contacted from this time to this time. It's almost like makes me feel like I'm being more flexible if it's like, I'll answer slacks later, but right now I got to do something.
Exactly, exactly. And that goes back to the calendar management, right? Like I think it's just making your team and visibly on your calendar showing like where you actually are going to be available and attentive, because the other part is there's nothing worse than just being available to seem available to a certain time, but you're really behind the scenes like doing a million things. I would rather say, hey guys, like 3:30 to 7, like I'm not going to be in front of my computer. So just know that anything you send me, I'll check when I get back at 7. And that's when I could physically sit down, as opposed to this like constant need to be on all the time. Like I think you just have to set those boundaries and breaks and just be feasible of what work can be done in what window. Because, there's a big difference between I can answer a quick question and I can sit down and look at your spreadsheet.
I mean, I think that's my issue is that I do try to just like answer the quick question on Slack, but then a lot of times I have to then like sit down and like really type it out, and it's not always a
Yeah.
quick answer. And then once I'm starting to get involved, I want to finish the idea, finish the thought or the project. So
Yeah.
I could
I
probably
think
work on
that
that one too.
Yeah, and I think that's the like the urgency that gets to us a lot. And so I've actually gotten better about this with my team too. Of I'll truly at point blank just say, "Hey, saw your question. Is this urgent, or can I get back to you tonight or tomorrow?"
Yeah,
And I think what you'll learn is oftentimes like a lot of people say, "Oh, tomorrow's fine." Like the other night, I got pinged about a survey question, and I immediately went to my phone to do what you were talking about, right? Like I was like, "Oh, quick question," and then I noticed myself typing a paragraph, and
yeah,
so I deleted that all, and I just wrote back to the person and said, "Is there any way I can just get back to you tomorrow? Like I need to think about this." And they were like, "Totally fine. I'm actually out of office till Friday." And you know what I mean? So like you create this false sense of urgency, I think, with the way a lot of those things work.
yeah. I mean, you and I also have customer facing jobs, and I think that's probably the bigger challenge, right? Because you do want to do a good job for your customers, and that creates kind of a sense of urgency as well.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, the one thing I would just say as a parent that my team's gotten better about is this collective sense of finishing a task with who is available. So we have like these group chats on Teams and things. And so sometimes when a customer thing does come up, myself or another member of my team will be like, "Hey guys, I just saw this come through. I'm headed to daycare pickup. Is anyone available to jump on this? Otherwise, I'll get back to it later." And oftentimes there's people who either have an extended hour or closer to their computer at the time, like they'll offer and say, "Hey, I'm happy to respond to it. Like I'll CC you." And so we kind of try to have like a backup system so that we can do things like that. And I've definitely picked up things from my team members like in the morning where they have something going on, and I am more available. So that can also help too, is just having like a buddy system of sorts. I know it's not always feasible in every job, but for the little things, sometimes it can really help.
Yeah. All right, we're going to move into the final segment called the Kalina's Advice Corner. So I'm going to ask you for some advice on a few topics,
Okay.
okay? Okay, so the first question is, what advice do you have for a parent who has a young kid, like an infant or a toddler, and does want to start thinking more about their mental health, and it's just kind of, before mental health is usually talked about? What's an important part of advice you would give?
I mean, therapy, if you have access to therapy, it's really, really important. And I know there's so many different avenues how you can get it. And I'm not saying it's easy these days to find a therapist, pay for a therapist, but there are a lot of different options.
For the
I,
parent or the baby or the infant?
for a parent, so when I had my son, I think in my head, I thought, "Oh, I'm just, stressed and all of this." And then once I started talking with a therapist, we had something through our company, we use Spring Health. I started recognizing how much I wasn't actually stressed. I was still having anxiety about, my child and leaving him at home and all of that. And it was manifesting into my career, or kind of getting into my career. And so, yeah, I just think being able to talk to someone, if you don't have a therapist, a friend, a coworker, whoever it is, but just kind of saying a lot of the things out loud that you're going through and dealing with. Because once I was able to actually talk about that, I think it helped me a lot. Because again, I wasn't identifying having anxiety. I was just like, "Oh, I'm tired and I'm a new parent." But once I started talking through that, I found a lot better ways to cope and find resources and just know that it was, temporary in nature and things like that, which was really, really helpful.
How can they help their kids focus on their mental health, their own mental health?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, like I talked a little bit about like the trigger side and things, but I think a lot of it is just like having that undivided attention. Like one of the things I've noticed from my son, even at a very early age, is he notices when I'm on my phone, he notices when I'm not fully present. And I think that has a huge impact on kids' mental health. So I have more strict rules now where, like I leave my phone at the door, I put it on a shelf. And so when we're playing, I'm never multitasking like that. Because yeah, I think very early on, like they need that attention. And so if you're going to be there, you be as present as you possibly can. And if you don't have the bandwidth for it in that moment, like there's sometimes where I truly just have to jump on something, then I am like expressing that to my son and saying, "Hey, do you want to watch the show real quick? Mommy has to take a call." But I'm being really clear that like mommy's focusing on this. So I'm going to give you this to focus on, as opposed to in the past, I would say, oh yeah, I see you, very cool, and then I'm talking on the side. Um,
Yeah.
so I think that's, and no parent's perfect. It still happens all the time to me, but I think that's one of the best things you can do for kids' mental health for sure is just try to give them the undivided attention when you have it, or be really transparent that you both need to focus on other things for a second and then come back together.
Yeah, that's a good one. I already can feel myself having some of those tendencies to like rock her with my foot while I'm doing something with my phone and stuff like that, you know?
Totally.
So
Yeah,
I
they
won't do
pick
it
up
anymore.
early. They really,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Got to get there. Yeah, 2 months in already, already having issues. Okay. What advice would you have for a uh, a mom who is about to be a parent but still has a career that she wants to focus on?
I think my biggest thing would be try to think about. So there's an exercise I did before my first maternity leave. I actually had a career coach give me this, so I can't take all the credit, but I tell this to everyone. She had me create a list, a physical write down list of what are the things that you absolutely love in your job that you want to make sure when you get back to the company you take back. And then what are things that you like about your job, but someone else could probably do or help you out with. And then the last bucket is what are things that you really don't like about your job that if you could come back to it and they weren't there anymore, you would really appreciate. And I think the exercise was so helpful for me, and I've had many moms do it since, because something that you view to be an activity or responsibility that you absolutely hate is a huge learning opportunity for someone else at your company, especially someone more junior or another person on your team that just likes that sort of thing better. And so it really helped me start to think about what are the areas that I am most passionate about. And when I come back from leave, I want to continue to just go full on in. And then what are things that someone else on my team who's covering for me, a more junior person, whatever it might look like, could start to pick up so that when I come back, perhaps that's something that they've taken on and really enjoy, or a learning opportunity that they got. And so, I advise anyone going on leave to just perform that exercise. You won't always get everything on every list, but at least when I came back from maternity leave, I did find myself freed up to focus on a lot more of the things that I'm really good at. And a lot of the things that I wasn't as good at, or I'd progressed in my career enough where a more junior person shouldn't have taken those on, I kind of didn't take back, and I allowed them to continue with that. And not in a rude way by any means. It was a great learning opportunity, and they got to take on a lot of project management responsibility for it. But the longer you're in your career, the more comes onto your plate. And so being able to shift some of that more appropriately before you go out is truly the best thing you can do. Oh, hang on, I can't hear you.
Sorry, that was my
Oh,
fault.
there we
I was gonna say I think that that's really great advice just for somebody who, you know, wants to reassess their career and just see what they like and don't like.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, you can do it at any time. And again, it's the hard delegation is truly the hardest thing, because you always think in your head the work you're giving someone else is going to feel like just work you don't want to do, and you're passing off and they don't want to do it either. But if you really get to know your team or even other people at the company, you start to recognize that at one point that was work that you craved to do too, just anything to get experience. So yeah, I highly recommend that exercise.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
Um, this is kind of silly, but I think the best advice I've ever received is truly go with your gut when it comes to career advice, personal, whatever. And I've learned that a lot as a mom too, is I really do go with my gut when I'm approached with a problem at work, when I'm approached with something with my son. Like, there's so much noise around you at all times of what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, and you're a bad mom, a good mom. And at the end of the day, you have to process what you know, and just go with your gut.
What what advice would you give to your former self?
To my former self, I mean, gosh, there's a lot of advice I'd give to my former self, but I think the main thing that comes to mind when I think about it is just to give yourself a little grace. It's really hard to become a new mom. It's hard to grow a career. It's hard to do all of that. And I think you are your biggest critic for sure. And so whenever I start to get really frustrated or feel down or wish I was doing more, I just try to mind myself like the fact that you care means you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
So just give yourself a little grace.
Love it. Last question. What advice do you have for me as a dad? Let's say by the time this episode comes out, Valentina will probably be like 4 months old, so it'll be a little time capsule for me. So, what advice do you have for me as a father of a 4 month old?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think the biggest advice I have for dads is to, I kind of talked about this a little bit, but is also find your people you can talk to about what it's like to be a dad. I think as a new mom, that kind of comes natural, right? Like you make a lot of mom friends, you go to the park, like you're always kind of chatting these moms. And I've noticed for my husband and just other dads, like they don't have that as much, right? Like men don't as intuitively do that. But the times that I've set up my husband to go do a play date with another dad that we're friends with or something, like I always find that he comes back a little bit more confident, right? Like he had someone else to talk about, like, wow, yeah, it is crazy to have a newborn. So I think just like as a dad, it's like finding other dads, right, to hang
Yeah.
out with because inheritively that those topics come up. And I think it really helps dads know that like they're not alone in the ways they're feeling. So yeah,
Well,
try to
tell
find
your
dads.
husband. Tell your husband if he's ever in New York and he wants to hang out with me, he can give me a call.
I will. I will. He
Okay.
will definitely. I mean, our son will at that point only be 2 months behind yours, so we'll have lots to
Yeah.
talk about.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been a really great conversation. Where can people go to connect with you, learn more about you, or anything that you want to promote or share?
Yeah, LinkedIn is best. I am very active on LinkedIn. I post a lot. I try to comment a lot. I try to get to answers to questions if you direct message me. But yeah, just give me a follow on LinkedIn or shoot me a note. And yeah, I'm very vocal, so you'll learn about my life, my personal life, professional, all of it. So yeah, would love to connect.
All right. Kaleana Quibell, ladies and gentlemen. Kaleana, thank you.
Thank you.